What are the most popular backend and full stack JavaScript frameworks? There's a lot. There's a bunch of them. A whole lot of frameworks. And guess what? There are the top, most widely used JavaScript frameworks that you will have the advantage if you take your time to learn. This means that you'll be most likely running into Next.js. It's the top up there, is number one. Next to Astro, TRPC, Create T3 app, and Nest. Those are the top. I'm going to take a look at each of these and sort of we'll learn what are the advantages of each of them. Obviously, the most popular is going to be the React framework, being that React.js is the most widely used JavaScript framework on the internet, and it's used everywhere. You can even use it to deploy mobile apps and other various kinds of applications. The place React is used most is going to be in web apps, specifically for full stack, being able to import data and present it to the user on the screen. So if you'll be using React.js on the web front end, it's most likely that you'll be pairing that with Next.js because it creates a full stack ecosystem. And if there was just one framework that you would be teaching yourself, make sure it would be a React-based one and jump into React and then also jump into Next.js. Next.js is the JavaScript app, the most widely used JavaScript framework that is full stack. It takes care of the entire communication from the server perspective all the way to the front end, to where you've got a user experience on the front end. And it has a pretty powerful, fully featured ecosystem. And it is used, it says the world's largest companies use it. We use it too at PubNub, and Next.js enables you to create high quality web applications with the power of React and React components. It is using React, and React is typically a more advanced framework that's capable of pretty much everything that you need it to be capable of. And therefore, it's going to have a lot of advancements and some higher, more challenging concepts to learn, but you can build it and target anything. So it's really powerful, and that's why a lot of teams like to use it, because it's really powerful to use across multiple teams. This is neat. All right, so this is more instantly stream UI from the server integrated by the app router. That's pretty powerful because what this allows you to do is help improve the overall user experience. Typically, when you're working with any kind of framework, especially with React, it's going to be a slow experience. For the end user, React is just so bulky. If you have the ability to compress and remove parts of it that you don't need to use, that the user is not going to be, bothering with initially, then they can have a nice, fast, streamlined experience. And having dynamically streamed capabilities, that's going to be a much better user experience for the end user. And with the addition of React server components, which is a new thing, you can easily send additional client-side JavaScript, you can add components without having to send any additional client-side JavaScript. That's really cool. So that means that you can deploy your web front-end application, but then also start passing in new components that can immediately start changing the user's experience without having to change the front end. That is really cool. So you can use React and Next.js to create hybrid web applications where parts of your code can be rendered on the server or the client, but rendering on the server, that's pretty powerful because that means that now you can have more dynamic and more control of your end user's experience without them having to reload their page or download a new client update. So it's pretty powerful. I'm looking at it. So obviously you've got the server side here, right? That can render the JavaScript and user interface components. And you've got the client side that can do the same thing if it has all the right code to do such a thing. Let's take a look at typically you kind of would understand what a client-side component is going to be, right? Where you're going to have like some buttons, some text, some input forms, image displays. Can we get with server components? I'm kind of curious. Static rendering, dynamic, and streaming. So if you're using Next.js, server components automatically come with your entire full stack framework. So you don't have to worry about it having to install something separate. Okay, we've got 3 server rendering strategies. One is static. So at build time, when you're deploying your server application, all that components and the capabilities will be baked in. So there won't be any dynamic capability, but there's also dynamic rendering where every single request will put together the code bundle that's needed for the front end to leverage any new UI components here. There's also a streaming. I saw a streaming. Here we go. What's the difference? What's the difference between streaming and render and dynamic? Streaming enables you to progressively render UI from the server. Interesting. Split chunks in stream client become red. This allows the user to see parts of the page immediately. Oh, okay. So what's going on here is the server is actually rendering the UI, and as it's iterating through its list, say if it's a UI that displays a list of information, right? Like a bunch of customer records, for example. You can start streaming in like the first 10 customer records that have been rendered on the server to the client, so the client can start displaying that information immediately. And then you can continue to stream in that information. All right, so that's nice. That's pretty good. So it's just multi-part. It's a sort of chunked encoding. Oh, and it happens automatically. So you don't really have to do a whole lot. Okay, that's pretty powerful. So this goes a long way into helping improve the user experience when you're deploying a React application. Next.js is starting to take advantage of all these capabilities that improve that overall user experience. Now, the browser is really powerful. It's really fast, and your computer is really fast. The JavaScript engines have been optimized to the moon. Guess what? When you start adding frameworks in, they tend to bulk down all that rendering and the user experience quite significantly. So Next.js goes extra steps to help improve that overall performance. That's why I can see why it is the most popular JavaScript full stack framework. Astro comes in at number 2 as the most popular, top-rated JavaScript framework. It is, I would say, pretty much mostly a back-end, or is it full stack? How could you say? It's essentially purpose-built for content websites. So if you've got a news media website or a publishing website, anything where the end user is mostly going to be consuming content, Astro is the framework for you. This is in sort of respects to sort of like if we were to look at something like Next.js, where you've got APIs that need to access back and forth between databases where you've got a lot of dynamic content. Next.js is going to be better. However, if you're mostly presenting just media and content to end users, Astro is the best framework that you should choose. It's all about being a web framework for content-driven websites. So anything that's media-oriented, publishing, news, articles, blogs, things like that, Astro is the best solution for you. Why? Because it comes built in purposefully for the fastest possible consumer experience with zero JavaScript out at the beginning. That's really powerful. JavaScript will significantly reduce the performance and the happiness of your end users. And if you're there to present the users with information and probably advertisements too, then you want them to have a really good experience so that way they stay on your site longer, browse more, get more impressions. A good use case for something like this would be very much likely any kind of documentation, right? Even Wikipedia itself should be running on Astro because it pre-builds and compresses and compiles everything that the end user is going to need to be able to deliver that to their web browsers. They can see everything and it displays and it renders really fast. Purpose-built to be the fastest system available. And a huge part of that comes with zero JavaScript. If you add any JavaScript in, you're going to have a slower end user experience. Any little bit of JavaScript is going to slow down your user experience. And I'm looking at the source code for Astro's. I do see some JavaScript in here. There's not a lot. It looks just like some boilerplate items, nothing really crazy. A little bit of UI interactivity. They have a little bit of homepage UI interactivity. Okay, so it's not a lot of heavyweight, because obviously if they're claiming that fastest possible websites, you're going to want as least amount of JavaScript as possible. And it looks like they don't even need that kind of JavaScript on their homepage, but they have some sort of interactivity around here somewhere. Okay, maybe this is it here. So we've got some interactivity here. And as a bonus, they've recently come out with here in just the last several months, 4.0. With 4.0, it's even faster. They've improved their docs. Okay, that's nice. Better development tool experience, enhances your local development environment, making it easier to sort of build with Astro. They do have some examples here of excellent use cases. So anything, a blog, any documentation, API documentation, marketing, e-commerce. If you need a website that loads really fast, and you need a website that loads fast, because it improves your SEO ranking. It also improves your end user's experience. Astro is the framework that you need to be using. Ooh, okay, so here's the new features with Astro 4.0. They've got an improved dev toolbar. They've got internationalization. That's nice, so you multi-language based on the routing. Incremental content caching. Interesting. This might be useful, although performance is suspect. Typically what you want to do is sort of bundle everything together and compress it in one nice little tiny package that the end target client can then display on the page and unwrap it all in one go. So there's no other dependencies that the browser would have to fetch based on that document itself. If it's all compressed in one package, it can display on the screen almost immediately. They've got improved logging and documentation. That's nice. What are the new view transition APIs? View transitions. Oh, neat. Okay. So you can have kind of more complex looking applications with interactive pages with view transitions, app-like experiences with only server rendered HTML, and minimal client-side sort of JavaScript boilerplate. That's nice. Animate, persist, morph, and slide. Neat. So if you do need some sort of interactivity or user data collection, then you might consider, the view transitions, because it's going to be the more optimal way to do this without having to use like a heavyweight JavaScript framework like React. And it's really easy if you want to get started with, what is this astro.new? I'm curious, what is going on here? Oh, look at this. They've got a whole bunch of templates. Oh, that is fantastic. Okay, so now they give you like a nice scaffolding for all these ready to go templates that then you can use and redesign as you need. And it will build and render as the world's fastest user possible experience. You can't get any faster. There's very little you can do to improve the performance beyond what you get with Astro. TRPC is a powerful JavaScript framework. It's full stack and it's mandatory full stack. You can't separate one from the other. In this case, TRPC has a really powerful proposition. One of the common challenges when you're developing software that has decoupled components like a front-end UI component and a server component, there's typically API contracts that occur between the two sides because the front end needs to know what data to fetch from the back end. And sometimes one side could change and it causes the other to break. This is a very common pattern that happens all the time. TRPC plans to efficiently and effectively, but also extremely restrictively, prevent that from ever happening again. At a significant cost, however. The idea behind TRPC is to move really fast, but know when you make a mistake or forget to implement the other side of the system, like the server API, it'll let you know. That's the one thing that it helps you fix, and it's the one thing that it helps you avoid, which is a very common everyday problem. So they are really solving a serious issue that does occur all the time for every systems these days. All systems, pretty much. A client, a web app, a phone app, they all need to access data from an API or a server. And the challenge is one of those two sides always needs to change. And when that happens, one of the sides is going to be broken. So what they let you do is ruthlessly change one side or the other, and before a build can occur, before a deploy can occur, it will block. It'll block you from going out into production with broken code because it'll know beforehand that the client and the server are not in sync. That's really powerful. There's also a nice bonus where it provides activity capability for all the existing frameworks out there. It lets you bundle and build into all existing projects. Though, of course, only the components of communication that are using TRPC will gain the benefit of this client-server synchronization. Here's the major drawbacks, and probably where you'd never want to use TRPC. If you're not using TypeScript. There's a big deal breaker right there. If you're not using TypeScript, then you can't take advantage of TRPC. Another one, and this is a big one, is if you have a decoupled server and client team. Say let's walk through an example here. The left side we have a server team, and the right side we have a client team. Actually, it's the other way around. It doesn't really matter so much in the case. We have a server on the right side, a client over here on the left side. So we got like a web browser, both index.ts, so client and server, right? On the server side, if we were to change something like, say, the user, to like user joy happy. Now we save that file. Now that we've changed the server, the terminal is going to print out all the errors and problems that occur saying, hey, guess what? We see a lot of issues. There's no longer a user. There's a user joy happy. So what you need to do is fix all of these users that are broken. Let's see if we can fix it. User joy happy. Oh, yep, starting to get fixed. Okay, user joy happy. All right, now we only have one. Let's see if we can get this last one here. Success! Okay, so there you go. There is the main power, the main capability of TRPC. This is why you'd want to use TRPC, is to make sure that your client and server are always in sync, which is really powerful, but it locks you in. You cannot escape to using other REST APIs externally, which there's a lot of other APIs out there that your business might rely on. you might wrap those APIs on the server, right? So your server would make those API fetches for you, and then you would still be able to maintain a contract with your front-end client. That's really powerful. You are stuck in JavaScript, TypeScript land. There's no options otherwise. And if you have decoupled teams or decoupled priorities on the sprint, one team will immediately block the other. It's guaranteed. It's a guarantee. If one side needs to change, both sides have to change, or else you're stuck. So that is a major problem. You could also see as you're deploying a new release version, the client could still run into an issue, so the client still needs to be refreshed every time. So migration paths are there's still some challenges there, right? If you are rapidly, continuously changing your API and your front end for accessing that data, TRPC is the best option that's available today. Another option here, check this out. If you're not using TypeScript and JavaScript for your server and client, check out OpenAPI, right? So you've got Swagger. This allows you to define in YAML or JSON, but probably YAML, your specification for your API that your client and server could then acknowledge and work forward with, right? And it allows you to decouple the two, but still maintain like a contract in sync between the client and server. This is another approach, just like an alternative. The major drawback is it's not automatic. It's upkeep, it's effort. So it's an incremental technical debt, but it's a nice technical debt because it helps maintain less buggy code. At PubNub, this is where we tend to go because we use every language, right? We have to support every possible language in every environment. And so we use something like OpenAPI with Swagger to be able to leverage these tools that allow us to keep our contracts with our SDKs and our server APIs in sync. If you're building a new JavaScript full stack application, you'll consider heavily the number 4 most popular JavaScript framework, which is probably Next.js, right? That's the one at the very top. Now, guess what? There's some parts of Next.js that are very common boilerplate to most production applications. And if we take a look at Create T3 app, this is a nice sort of script that will bootstrap your application, starting something from new using Next.js as the core, and adding a few extra bits to it that are really common and just basically required for all modern production applications. If we take a look at Create T3 app, it's really focusing on starting your next full stack Next.js app, leveraging the power of type safety with TypeScript, Next.js specifically, and a few extra bits. So if we take a look at the documentation, we see, what are we seeing here? Core pieces of Next.js, TypeScript, Tailwind for displaying your user interface, and a few extra backend components optional as well, like TRPC, Prisma, and Next.auth.js. Create T3 app is just a CLI. It doesn't do anything else. It's just a CLI that helps you start your application on the right track. From the very beginning, you'll probably want to be using this. If you're using Next.js, or if you're considering using the most popular JavaScript full stack framework, Next.js is the answer there, you might want to consider using Create T3 app to start that application. Oh, very nice. Okay, so start with your data backend, your ORM, your authentication. Okay, so there's a bit of setup here. Don't get me wrong, but this is all required things for modern applications on the web. You need all this stuff. Then we get started with Next.js. You get all that set up, which is some effort. Obviously, there's not a lot to do with TypeScript. Once you're there, you're there. Once we have we're just using TypeScript in that case. Then we get some additional power capabilities with Zod for schema validation. Ooh, and 10-stack query. This is neat. Uh-oh, well, that didn't work. Looks like some Lambda function timeout here didn't work. For sales working, my internet's working, but the serverless function didn't work. I guess that's not a good 10-stack scenario. Maybe not using 10-stack right now. You could get set up with TRPC if you wanted. Okay, so this is where the power of T3 comes in. It really helps you get started on the right track. You get to pick and choose what's necessary. I mean, you're going to start with the best default stuff. Next.js, probably TypeScript, of course. You don't need TRPC. Tailwind is a fantastic option here. And Prisma for database connectivity. Obviously, Next.auth. Authentication for Next.js, right? So powerful in that perspective. Oh, very nice. All right. So it gives us access to Facebook, Apple, Google, even email directly. Oh, passwordless. I'm actually curious to see what list of providers. They probably have every provider, right? Let's see what providers they offer. Providers. Everything. Oh, wow, this is fantastic. Which one do you choose? All right, from a product perspective, if you're going to have to choose which auth provider to use with Next.auth.js, you'll want to pick any of these lists that sort of intersect with the users that will be using your site. So say if you have a platform as a service that focuses on documents, you know, Box and Dropbox would be fantastic. So if you're starting a new application and you're doing it from the very beginning in an empty folder, use T3. T3 is going to be the best way to get started. It's going to set you up on the right track from the start. Number 5 on the top 5 backend and full stack JavaScript projects, we see NestJS. Well, NestJS. All right, NestJS. NestJS, in this case, it is specifically focused on one major thing, and that is server side. It's going to be focusing specifically on server side, making your life easier when you're building with TypeScript. If you're looking to start a new project that's going to be sort of an API that another team will be consuming, you might be building a microservice, NestJS is a really good idea. They describe it as a progressive Node.js framework for building efficient, scalable server-side applications. So this really is specifically just for server-side. Obviously, in order to leverage what's going to be the output, the server is typically going to have an interface of an API. And so this is where Nest really comes in. It's going to help us out a lot. You'll be wanting to use NestJS if your team is specifically looking to build just an API that will be consumed by others. So there's not really a UI involved. Right? In this case, you're just building the API. NestJS is for you in this case. And it helps you get started on the right path for building just this API from a server perspective or your microservice. It wants you to use TypeScript. And also under the hood, it uses fast server-side frameworks like Express and can even use Fastify, which is an even more lightweight server for Node.js. So Nest provides out-of-the-box application architecture which allows developers and teams to create highly testable, scalable, loosely coupled, and maintainable server applications. And they say the architecture is inspired by Angular. Interesting. Angular inspired for a server-side framework. Easy to get started with a new project. Just install it and then nest new project name and then run start. Okay, so they're very MVC oriented. We've got our controller and a controller spec. Interesting. This might be useful for consuming the APIs. Okay, so we've got our main TS file here, TypeScript. We just import the core and start the server. Very easy and simple. Then we start constructing our API. Cats controller. We're looking for all the cats. Return every cat. Oh, okay. So then you can have URI parameters. You specify the parameter, and then you can return the data associated with the parameter. All right, so here's like a full example, right? So we've got a create, read, write, and update. You can create, you can get data, you can get one, you can update one, and you can delete. So this will be like the controller, obviously, in here inside of this function when you're creating a new cat, for example. You would probably be accessing a database function here. You can return custom response codes if you wanted to with some data. So like if you wanted like an error, you could return an error here. Say if there are no cats found, right? For example, there are no cats, then you can return like a 404, like not found. There's an abstraction here with the DTO that isn't necessarily needed. DTO is data transfer object. Now, obviously, you're going to have a representation of a cat, right? The cat's name, the color, maybe how old the cat is. That data is represented in data space within the application, but you might want to serialize it and transit that data over to, say, a client or over an API. The DTO is going to ensure that that data is transitionable, but for the most part, all data is transitionable anyway, so you don't really need this extra abstraction on top. You can just, use basic serialization. This is pretty neat. So within a controller, you can sort of add and remove services and controllers as needed. Nest.js is really going to help you abstract a lot of the development lifecycle over time for your API, providing paths for upgrades, adding new APIs, and making it really simple and streamlining that process. So if you're building a new server API and you're looking to use TypeScript, definitely consider Nest.js.